So let us rejoice and be glad in it. I'm so honored that you're making this time to hear about the recent trip that your pastor and I took back in January. This trip to Ethiopia. I'm sure most of you knew about it. He was away for a couple Sundays, and he has invited me to come and share about my own research dealing with ancient Ethiopia. But I also want to share about our actual trip that we took. You all have a phenomenal leader here at this church, and he's a student at the School of Divinity, and I had not known him prior to taking the trip. And I just have to share that I was greatly impressed by his leadership, his knowledge, and his love for learning and growing in his spiritual walk and also in his academic walk. So to have a pastor like Reverend Minister Rodgers that you have is indeed a blessing. So before I even get started, I just wanted to affirm who he is at the School of Divinity and also what he's doing in leadership and in ministry at your church. So today, I actually want to share with you a bit about the trip that we took in January, where there was a delegation of us who traveled to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And our mission was to actually return a manuscript that we discovered belongs, seeing if my clicker is working here. There it is. Yeah. So this is just an image of Howard School of Divinity. We are located in the northeast part of Washington, D.C., and we're currently temporarily relocated to the law school campus in the northwest part of D.C. But all of this travel that we did in January revolved around this collection of Ethiopian artifacts and manuscripts that we have at the School of Divinity. And it's known as the Andre Tweed Collection of Sacred Ethiopian Artifacts and Manuscripts. This collection was donated to the School of Divinity back in 1993, and that was shortly before the donor, Dr. Andre Tweed, died of a long-standing illness that he had. In the collection, there are 240 artifacts and 150 manuscripts. Here's an image of Dr. Tweed. He actually was an alum of Howard University. He went to the College of Medicine back in the 40s and actually became the first board-certified psychiatrist in Los Angeles, California. So Dr. Tweed was a physician, a psychiatrist in particular, but he had a great love for African culture, African artifacts, and he traveled throughout the world. And during his travels, he started collecting these Ethiopian artifacts and manuscripts that we're talking about in the Tweed collection. So mind you, when I first started my research back in 2005, 2006, that was about 10 years ago. I'm located at Colgate Rochester Divinity School in Rochester, New York, and I had no idea about the Tweed collection. Of course, I knew about Howard University and this great area, but I only came to learn about the Tweed collection through a little exhibit catalog that was produced when the collection was on display at a museum in California. And you may wonder about my interest in all of these things having to do with Ethiopian Christianity. And just to give you a little background, this all started as a result of a book that I wrote about images of Ethiopians, Egyptians, and blacks in early Christian literature. This book is called Symbolic Blackness and Ethnic Difference in Early Christian Literature. And when I was writing this book, I realized, and you can see there's an image of the Ethiopian eunuch on the cover. Do you all know the story of the Ethiopian eunuch who was baptized. That's for the most part the only reference that we have in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular, that talks about Ethiopians. So I started doing some research on ancient Ethiopia, on Egyptians and blacks in early Christian literature. But what I discovered is that all of the sources that I worked with were either Greek and Latin sources, representing the Greco-Roman world, that world out of which Paul pursued all of his missionary activities. The Greco-Roman world is the world of the New Testament. But when we only look at Greek and Latin sources, we don't honor the history and culture of Ethiopia. And so what happened is, when you're doing this kind of scholarship, you can't begin to get into it until you learn the language. And when you go to seminary, and your pastor is in seminary now, they don't teach you ancient Ethiopic. They teach you Latin, they teach you Greek, they teach you Hebrew, they teach you Aramaic, all of these biblical languages. Oh, there she is over there. Hello. I could use some help this morning, Tatiana. And so my first step, and I just wanted to back up as to how I got into this. I started learning ancient Ethiopic because every time I would go and do lectures on this material, people would ask me, well, what were the Ethiopians doing? You told us what the Greek and Roman authors were saying about the Ethiopians, but how do we learn about that tradition of Christianity without having the opportunity to go to those sacred sources themselves? So step number one was learning the language itself. And when I started learning the language, then I realized I need to get my hands on the sources. And that's what led me to Dr. Andre Reynolds Tweed. That's what led me to the Howard University School of Divinity. And that's what still has me on this trajectory of scholarship that is now coming full circle. Okay? So as I said, I initially learned about the Tweed collection through this catalog that showcases what the contents of this material involved. And when I was looking through the catalog, there was, can you all see this okay? The lights are kind of high here, but okay. There was a catalog entry that says, let me see if there's a pointer here. Is there a pointer at all? Mm-hmm. Which way? Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah. He's also a technological guru as well, among his other attributes. So anyway, this is a picture, from the catalog itself. And what does it say? I'm a New Testament scholar, so of course I'm looking at this catalog, and it says New Testament. This stands for pseudepigrapha. Those are those books in the Bible that are in between the Old Testament and the New Testament, also called extra-canonical or extra-biblical sources. And it says the Acts of Paul and other apostles, right? And you can see here 15th century text. And so that's when I said, as a New Testament scholar who does a lot of research on the Pauline letters, of course I wanted to try to see this Ethiopic manuscript to see if I could learn any more insights from this body of literature. So that's what got me to Howard University, where I actually looked at the manuscript itself. Okay, so I traveled here. You can see this is the same as the manuscript in the catalog. This is a photo of the manuscript that I took when I came and started my research. And what I discovered is that the manuscript does contain the Acts of Paul, as it says in the catalog, on pages 2 to pages 118. But I also discovered that the manuscript had another book tucked in there behind the Acts of Paul called the Acts of Sarah Bowman. And from that catalog, there would have been no way of knowing that this additional text about this church father named Sarah Bowman even existed. And so, fast forward now, I did this research on the Tweed collection. I started sharing the scholarship, and I also had an opportunity to share what we determined as an issue in the provenance with the text. Now, provenance is a fancy word that has to do with where something originated. What are the origins of the document? And in the microfilm records related to this Acts of Paul text, there was a record that indicated that this text actually belonged to the Deborah Libanos monastery in Ethiopia. But I knew that I had just found this manuscript at the Howard University School of Divinity. So that presented a dilemma. What do we do when we have these ancient African sources in our collections? And Howard is not an exception to this rule. African artifacts and sources are dispersed throughout this country, throughout Europe, and throughout other places in the world, and there is no sense of accountability as to where this material actually belongs. And as a result of my talking about this material some 10 years ago, when I would raise it, no one actually thought that this could be true. People would just become fascinated and they said, oh, that's a great find. It's a good thing that you found this. But it wasn't until I actually joined the faculty and staff at Howard that I was able to collaborate with my other colleagues who also subsequently discovered the provenance discrepancy, that we began the effort to try to repatriate or return the manuscript back to its rightful home of Ethiopia. And that's where your pastor, who's a student at Howard, happened to be in the right place at the right time to join our delegation to take this manuscript back to Ethiopia. So here's an image of the delegation that traveled to Ethiopia. In the center, that's Dean Alton Pollard, who is the Dean of the School of Divinity. There's my colleague, Dr. Alice Bellis, who's also a professor of Old Testament. You see yours truly here, Associate Dean, and your pastor, Reverend Lawrence Rodgers. And to the left here is my administrative assistant, Mrs. Blaine Zerahun, who is in fact Ethiopian. And she was integral in helping us to have conversations and walk through all of the diplomatic legwork that had to be done prior to being able to take this manuscript back. It's one thing wanting to do a good deed and set a moral example. There's another thing when you have lawyers at a university who have to be gatekeepers of the gift that was bestowed to Howard. So remember now, Dr. Tweed had no idea when he acquired the manuscript that it was out of place, if you will. He was just going around doing what other collectors do, which is they get on the antiquities market and they buy these manuscripts and they put them in their collection. So it became a sensitive issue to walk through all of the legal dynamics and all of the other political dynamics with Ethiopians themselves, who are making a lot of noise about their sacred artifacts that have been misplaced. And so thankfully, we were able to have good conversations and negotiations with all parties involved, and we worked out all of the logistics so that we were able to actually embark on our journey. So here you can see we're at Dulles Airport now and about to depart to Ethiopia. This is back in January. It was right around the 10th when we left on a Saturday. And I do want to give credit to Reverend Rodgers, who actually helped me put together this slide presentation. We were all taking hundreds and hundreds of pictures. So when you do a big trip like that, you want to be able to capture the key moments. And so we think we've done that. So as we're going to Ethiopia, I always like to put up a map of the country itself. And you can see it's a very large country, okay, with the capital, Addis Ababa, right in the center of the country. Basically, it's in what is known as the Horn of Africa. Has anyone ever traveled to Ethiopia or any other parts of Africa among you? Where have you been? Yes, West Africa. Yeah. Oftentimes, that's our basic entry point or engagement of Africa, the western part, as a result of the slave castles and things of that sort. Yes. Nice. And so to make a journey across the entire continent to Ethiopia is indeed more than a notion. And we started out in Addis Ababa, and you can see where it says Shawa here. The monastery that we traveled to is about, say, 55 miles north of the capital city, Addis Ababa, in that region known as the Shawa region. Okay? So when we arrived, we started making our connections in Ethiopia, and you can see this person to the right is Sabate. He's actually the leader of the Deva Libanos Monastery. We're having lunch and making connections with all of the other parties in Ethiopia who were helping us with the trip. And then the very next morning, we started the trip by actually meeting with the Holy Patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So it was very important when you do a trip like this and when you're dealing with sacred artifacts from a particular country, that you get the blessing of those for whom this material is sacred and for whom it belongs. So we met with the Holy Patriarch. He actually had a whole press conference to receive us, and there were a lot of questions about what we were doing, and you can see us all lined up right here at the table. And this was a room full. These are monks that are lined up in the room. So it was a very, very big deal. And everybody was ready and receptive to our presence there. Now, this person on the left here is Memher, and that's basically a term meaning priest. His name is Zebana Lema. He's a local priest of an Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Maryland, here, Temple Hills, Maryland. And he's also a double alumnus of the School of Divinity. So when you consider how we're able to pull off such a trip like this, it was because of relationships and connections with leaders in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church right here in this area. And you can see Dean Pollard and myself and Memher and Zebana. We're actually getting the manuscript out and preparing to transfer it over to the Ethiopian officials. And here's the patriarch again with the manuscript sitting right there on the table in front of him. And so there was actually a lengthy debate about the process and the deed of gift that the monastery had to sign in order to receive the manuscript. And we worked through all of those details. And here is Reverend Rodgers again, actually meeting Abuna Matthias is his name, the Holy Patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So then that was early, like 7 o'clock, 7:30 on that Monday morning, January 11th. And then after that meeting, which took about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, we went ahead and drove up to the monastery. And here's an image of us driving to the monastery. And as you can see, people, hundreds and hundreds of people were everywhere ready to receive us at the monastery. Okay? You can see us all lined up. They had a whole platform and stage set up for us. And here's my administrative assistant again with her husband. We're all just taking in the moment. See if I can hands. And here's the priest actually lifting up the manuscript and showing it to the entire community. He's offering remarks. That's the same monk who had come to the hotel to meet with us. And then while we were there, we had a chance to give a plaque to the community that commemorated our effort to return the manuscript. And you can see that this Memher Zebana reading the plaque that we had made to mark this occasion. And here we are in front of the case. They already had a case prepared for us. We went on and had lunch. So I'm just trying to give you a snapshot of what we experienced, what your pastor experienced during this time when we were together. They also gave us many gifts, and there was a prayer shawl that they gave us here, which has this Ethiopic, the Amharic writing, which basically says, the people bless the place, and the place blesses the people. So all of us who are part of the delegation received these shawls, and some of us received some paintings here. This is an image of Tekla Hymanot. He is the person who founded this particular monastery. And there's a great story about his extreme acts of renunciation and how he withdrew into the desert, and he even cut off his foot. I don't think you can quite see it here, but this is his foot that's severed from his body. And he was known to have stood on one foot without eating for days and days at a time to show his devotion to God. And this monastery is named after Tekla Hymanot. So then that was our first day in Ethiopia, where we actually returned the manuscript. That was our main mission for going there. And then after we did that, we had a chance to tour the city and tour the country as a whole and learn more. That's part of why we went. Oftentimes when you go in as a tourist, you're kind of just taking in and buying stuff and trying to get what you can gain very quick and fast. But we wanted to actually take time to learn the culture. And I think that will be one of the most important things we can do as a church. And that's why it's important that we come back and share what we've established in our local churches, because one of the things that keeps us separated from other cultures is the mere fact that we just don't know about one another. We don't tend to even think about the origins of Christianity in Ethiopia. We don't think about what the Ethiopian Orthodox community, which is right here among us in this region. There's the largest population of Ethiopians outside of Ethiopia itself, right in the DMV, right in this area. And very seldom do we have an opportunity to interact with them, to learn about their traditions, their cultures. And so what we wanted to do is take time to go to traditional schools. And you can see how they have these young adolescent boys who are sort of tapped and called upon to step into the priesthood. And their training begins very early by going to these traditional schools where they sit with a teacher. And this was the master teacher of the class. They sit with the teacher and they have an opportunity to learn the sacred writings. Now here is your pastor again. And I'm wondering, it looks like we actually had a live slide. Can it, I want you to see how we participated in the life of that community. You can see he's holding the text, but Reverend Rodgers also had an opportunity to actually recite the text in Ethiopic. He sat there, and you can see him sitting there. He actually sat there and joined in with the class. And it was a class where they chant. So what they do, they don't just get on a blackboard and start writing, and you sit down at a desk with pens and paper and pencils, you can see everybody's just sitting around their teacher. And they learn in the oral tradition way of recitation. So that means that the teacher would say something and the students have to repeat it. And that's what Reverend Rodgers had a chance to experience. I don't know if this will actually come up or not, but I want you to be able to hear how that classroom came to life. Yeah. So we're going to try to bring this up. While we're waiting on that slide, though, let me just take you through a couple others, if I can. I know they have it down. So as you can see, we had a travel itinerary when we were taking our trip. You know how you have, the places you want to go and all of that. But then we had these moments where there were just surprises that would emerge. And the hospitality of the Ethiopians was overwhelming. They invited us into the community. They fed us and took us into their places of worship. And they really made us feel like we were a part of their culture. They made us feel like we were home. And that's the beauty of being able to take on something like this, because now, even in my own research and study, and I had had a chance to travel to Ethiopia 10 years ago, but it was one of those kind of travel tours where everything is all scripted and staged, and you got to keep up with the big group. It was a big group of like 25 or 30 people. It's very different when there are just 5 or 6 of you. We could ease in and out, and we can go to different places, and we can change up and do different things. And the different interest of each member in the group was honored. And so that's just a real unique experience. We're trying to see. Do you think we'll be able to get it? Oh, it's great.
And the servants for the audience, the congregation. It's composed like, this style. This one is for people, the audience, the communication. Okay. Repeat after me. Wow. Yes.
Wow. I love that. That is my favorite example of teaching and learning. Okay? That's what it's all about. We were welcome to the table. Thank you for getting that together. We were welcome to the table, and you can see how it's all in relationship. It's learning in community. And they're doing that with these young adolescent boys at an early age, where they're memorizing and learning everything at the foot of a master teacher. And I just wish we could have that kind of teaching and learning in our own theological schools and in our own churches even today. Because you can see how it all comes to life. The student, Reverend Rodgers, but also the teacher was excited and enthused to just bring him right into that learning moment. That's what it's all about. That's the beauty of what we experience, that we can break down all of these dividing walls if we can find a place at the table for every one of us. And I'm committed to this scholarship around ancient Ethiopia because it challenges us to be inclusive of all of God's people. Sometimes when we think about Christianity, we tend to get a Eurocentric version of the story that leaves out the experiences of Africans and people of African descent. But if we center the story of the Ethiopian eunuch and the experiences of Ethiopians in our scholarship and our research and our teaching and in our preaching, we'll have a totally different image of the kingdom of God. And so after we went to the traditional school, we then went to the Holy Trinity Theological College. And this is basically like the seminary for the Orthodox Church in Addis Ababa. This is one of them. And so you can see we're all gathered together. Once again, all of the males were in the classroom, and they all just invited us in again. And we just had a wonderful time of fellowship. We had an opportunity to meet with the administrative leadership of the theological college. And we at the School of Divinity are setting forth some memorandums of understanding so that we can start to have student exchanges and faculty exchanges, because we want more than just one student like Reverend Rodgers to have the kind of experience we had back in January. I want to institutionalize a program where anyone who's interested in Christianity from an Ethiopian perspective can have an opportunity to actually go to the country and study in that locale. And so once again, like I said, we had all of these serendipitous moments where the folks right in the library, this young man just stood up and started reading the sacred text. That was just a beautiful part of our trip. Here's the library, the computer lab, another dean of the school there. We then went on to the Institute of Ethiopian Studies, which is on the campus of Addis Ababa University. And we had a chance to look at their collections there. We went to the National Museum, and you can see Reverend Rodgers and Dean Pollard there in front of one of these famous monuments that was donated back. So you can see how we toured. We were able to see the remains of Lucy, which is considered the first hominid or human in existence, all the way back to Ethiopia. Okay? We went to Haile Selassie's cathedral. Here's the church. He had an actual place in the sanctuary where he and his wife sat during the service. His tomb is right there in the cathedral. We went to King Menelek's palace and church. And then all of this that I've shown you up to this point is in the capital city of Addis Ababa. So after we spent several days in the capital city, then we shifted and went north to what's known as Aksum. And this is very significant for the study of early Christianity, because Aksum is the place where King Ezana, E-Z-A-N-A, was actually converted to Christianity in the 4th century, around the same time that Constantine was converted in Rome. But we tend to only think about Constantine's conversion and the Roman Empire, when in fact there was another thriving empire known as the Aksumite Empire that was going on at the same time as the Roman Empire. And so we traveled and we were able to see the Stelae Park. The Stelae, these are the burial grounds and grave markers of the kings here. We went to the Queen of Sheba Palace, the remains, you know, in the Old Testament story of the Queen of Sheba. Okay. And after Aksum, we traveled on up to Lalibela. And that's the place where we have these churches that were built right out of the rock and stone, the rock-hewn churches. I don't know if any of you all have seen images such as this of St. George's Church. This is a famous image that we were right inside the church. In fact, the church is down, we're up, and the church, we were down beneath and inside that particular church. And once again, here's our delegation with one of our tour guides here. And then after so we went up north, and these are known as the Christian historical sites. So Aksum covers, say, the first 6 centuries, and then Lalibela picks up that medieval period from the 7th century onward. And so when Christians come to Ethiopia, those are some of the important sites they want to visit: Addis Ababa, Aksum, and Lalibela. But as I said, for the study of the New Testament, the real breakthrough for me occurred when I was able to make that connection with Ezana's conversion to Christianity at the same time that Constantine converted in the 4th century. So Christianity was thriving and moving through all of these different regions. And so this Ethiopian eunuch was no anomaly, right? There was a whole group of peoples who were coming out of the Sudan and Ethiopia and Nubia during that time. We also went to the African Union. Okay. And then Haile Selassie was integral in the African Union. This is like our UN here in the States. Okay. We had a chance to observe Timkat. That's a major festival around the Ark of the Covenant. Bless you. In Ethiopia. And that's why our trip extended as long as it did, because we wanted to make sure we observed this major religious festival. This is like a parade. I can hardly even think what it would compare to here in this is a religious holiday where they let everyone out from school, and people are just all throughout the city at different parts of the city following these replicas of the Ark of the Covenant. It marks Epiphany in Ethiopia, okay, because their Christmas is a little later than ours, and then they have Epiphany after that. That's what Timkat stands for. It's the Epiphany celebration, okay? So that gives you just some idea of the massive amounts of people who were just lined in the streets. And you would think this is maybe like Mardi Gras or something. I'm trying to help you to get a flavor for the excitement and the fervor in the community. But it was a religious holiday. There are priests all around. You can see them marked there. Okay, the umbrellas, that's how they cover the ark and keep it protected from the sun. The children are there with their families. Okay, you're getting the picture here. So that, in a nutshell, is the nature of our trip. It was an opportunity to make connections, to explore some possibilities, and to learn more about ancient Ethiopia. Because even in this modern context, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is still adhering to and upholding the ancient practices from the beginning of the formation of the church. So you know how in our contemporary society, we've let culture come in and we've kind of shifted things and made worship comfortable for us. And you know the things we adjust to make it possible to come to church and still want to be here. And the Ethiopic tradition, they are still adhering to the prayers, the fasting, the standing for hours upon hours at a time in worship. You know, we can hardly stand for a couple hymns and we're ready to sit back down again. They're standing for hours and hours in worship. And so the beauty of this is the monastic community where they are praying and fasting and upholding the laws of the covenant and all the traditions that have been handed down to them. And so we actually have much to learn from this trajectory of Christianity. And it tends to be so foreign to us. And I just want to come and just open up a whole new world, a whole new possibility. Your pastor has had exposure to this tradition. He can also give his own summary of how it impacted him. Maybe you all can have some other further studies to go in deeper. But I wanted to give you an overview of our commitments at the Howard University School of Divinity. You know, it's not just about educating African Americans, but we're representing what theological education should look like in the 21st century for all of God's people. And we're called to train men and women who are willing to be bold and courageous and explore uncharted paths so that we can start to build better and stronger relationships among us. And so I welcome an opportunity for your questions, your feedback. I know you've already been worshiping all morning, so I appreciate your attention and that you just can get an idea of who your pastor is, though. He's had a life-changing experience that bit by bit will trickle into the ministry of this church. You can't help it. But we don't do it in a heavy-handed kind of way. We just want to bring it to you in a way that you can see that in the end, the kingdom of God will be built here on this earth. Yes.